Where did our family come from?
Well, I was born with my parents being from the Middle East. However, my mother was from the middle part of the United States. So my mother actually, her parents were from like Germany and France, but I'm not real sure about her mother, where her mother was from. And I know that my dad was born in the Middle East in Jaffa, Palestine. And he is totally 100% Arabic. And my grandparents on his side are Arabic. And then my mother, she doesn't really know about her ancestors on her dad's side. And most of her mother's side, I believe, there might have been a little Indian. I'm not sure if there's any tribes or what, but I know that that's kept. My mother has a list of that she did a couple years ago. That I don't really know the mixture of different countries around the world.
Okay, how do you know?
Because my parents told me, and I actually lived over in the Middle East. My grandparents on my dad's side died before I was born, and so I do know that just being from the Middle East, living over there, seeing cousins and relatives, I mean, that kind of confirms it.
How many generations can you trace back from your parents?
Well, I really can't go back. I personally can't trace a whole lot going back. I can do my parents and probably their grandparents. And actually, my mother, I remember when I was a little girl that her grandma was still alive. So I know my mother's mother's mother. And I believe she was from West Virginia and probably grew up on a farm and was very poor. And that's all I could trace back, personally.
Can you recall any names?
Well, we have like the traditional, I don't know, German names. There's Gertrude, there's Ida May, there's Helen, there's Mary, and Charles. And when you talk about my dad, there's names like Mustafa, Hashem, the last name was El Bate. So those kind of names, those are like...
How are all those people related to you?
Well, all those people that I said, like Arabic names, are pretty much grandparents. And Fatima was my grandmother that I said I've never met her. And I've got cousins still all around the world with different names that I don't really even know their names. I've never met them. They've moved to Algeria, they're in Africa, they're in Egypt. Some are still in Israel or Palestine, because you know there's a story about those states. That's a divided nation, and I know there's people all over that country that we've broken off from, because my dad had so many brothers and sisters.
Do you know anybody's birthday?
I know my daughter's birthdays, I know my mother's birthday, I know my dad's birthday. My grandma, I'm not sure when my grandma was born, but I do know my grandfather was December, like me.
Do you know the
That's
years?
how I remember. I think my grandmother was born like in 1918, and probably my grandfather was right next to them.
What about your mom and dad's birthday?
I think my dad was born in 1932, and my mother was born in 1941.
Okay. Do we have any veterans in our family?
Personally, no veterans in the U.S. Army or government. I know that my mother's sister, which is my aunt, she married a veteran that served in the armed forces, and he went to Germany for a year or two during, I think, the Second War, maybe. And
what about your dad?
My dad was in the international services. He was actually in the Jordanian Air Force as a surgeon. He wasn't a soldier, but he helped do surgery and medical care for the soldiers that came through that country in Jordan. In fact, my sister was born in Amman, Jordan.
Did your dad like wear the uniform?
Yeah, I have a picture of him wearing the uniform. But we don't look at the pictures a whole lot.
Why?
He actually defected from that. He did the king a favor at the time. He got out of the Air Force, that part, the Jordanian Air Force. He actually said he went on vacation and took his family, and we came to America, and we stayed in America, and he hasn't been back for 50 years.
Do you have any other stories about him?
I know that he was forced to go from his country in the 1950s, and he actually was put, when he was in Palestine, the war started in the mid-50s, and he went over to Africa and went to the country of Egypt, and he started, he was actually left in a concentration camp to die. However, after weeks or months, and I don't know the full story because it's hard to talk about, he was found, he was at the gate, and he found a soldier that actually recognized his who he was and knew my dad's family, and he did my dad a family and helped my dad escape. And then my dad found a job working on the Suez Canal for the British government, and my dad knew how to speak English and Arabic, and he put himself through medical school and then came to the States to finish medical school, and that's where we met my mom.
Can you explain the story of how they met?
Well, my dad was a resident in West Virginia in one of the hospitals in orthopedics, and my mom was in her nurse's training, and that's how those two met. He actually was going out with my mother's friend, and my mother's friend said, "I really don't want to go out with you. Here's Margaret." So my dad and my mom got together and got married pretty quickly, and then my mom had to quit nursing school because back in the 1960s and even the 1950s, the nurses were told not to marry or get pregnant. Their profession came first. So when she married my father, she dropped out of nursing school and then started a family with him.
Do you have any other stories?
About my parents?
About anything?
About anything? Well, so many years later, I went to school and I finished nursing school, which I totally did not relate it to my parents because all growing up, I did not want to be in medicine. So I actually, when I went to college, I met some friends, and they knew I liked the sciences and the chemistry, so they said, "Oh, you should do that and go into nursing. You'd make a good nurse." So I did go into nursing. I finished the 4-year BSN program, and then maybe like 3 years later, I ended up meeting my husband that also went to the same university that I did, but we didn't know each other at the same time. And we met through his sister and my sister. Our sisters were roommates together, and that's how we met each other. And I have 3 kids now, and they're all actually very interested in medicine and science and chemistry. So that's kind of interesting how it all gets turned around.
Anything else?
Any other stories?
You can say no.
Religion is an interesting story with our family because everybody has different religions within our story, different faiths, different practices. So you could talk a long time about religion and politics with my family because we're all divided. Even though we're all a family, we're all divided on different issues as far as politics go and religion. My mom taught us as a Baptist, and I grew up as a Baptist, even though my father from the Middle East was a Muslim. But he didn't really practice that a whole lot here in the United States. He kind of protected us from the kids. I used to understand a little bit Arabic, but when he came to the States, we spoke English only.
What do you mean by protected you from it?
Well, in the 1950s and 60s, America was not really accepting the foreigners, especially from the Middle East and the war going on. People didn't want to hear different languages. The school systems were set up for English, only know English. And so we pretty much just stayed on track with that American English speaking with growing up, basically. Even in our neighborhood, there were really no other foreigners that I knew of. I'm sure looking back, people came from different areas from the United States, and I remember a couple of houses down, there was a family from the Philippines, and they also spoke English through the school system and with the neighbors, and only did they speak their native tongue in their house with their parents and their grandparents. And their parents came over from the Philippines with a medical degree, and that was not allowed in the United States for them to practice. So both of those, the parents, the mother and father, they went back to medical school, each to get a medical degree from the United States. And their grandma actually raised those kids, and she really never really learned English. She spent her later years with that family raising the kids while mom and dad went back to school.
Go back to the religion thing about Grammy being Baptist.
Well, my mom was Baptist growing up, so she took all of us 5 kids pretty much to church every Sunday. And my dad didn't object. He actually came with us like on Christmas or Easter, special occasions. And I think he just didn't want us to read the book about his religion. It's called the Quran, because that has different beliefs about how to treat people or practicing different things that I guess it wasn't important for him for us to know that. I understand there's some injustice and probably some hatred in that religion, and you know that culture is a different society from the United States, and women were not treated equally like they are here in the United States. So growing up, I'm a Baptist. I married a Lutheran, so we tried to adjust being a Methodist to find a church for us, but that was conflict between my husband and I, because he grew up Lutheran and I was Baptist, and that's really not a problem, but we never really did find a place where we can worship. But getting back to my mother, when she divorced my father, she remarried, and she eventually became a Mormon. So that's a whole nother story with the Mormon religion, her beliefs. She's tried to convert us as kids, and actually my brothers and sisters are now practicing as a Mormon, and that's a strong family group setup that they have together. And
do you think that influences how they have different political views than you?
Yes, because the more I believe, what I see from my family, that the Mormons, they try to be conservative and family and rigid rules, and they exclude a lot of people. And so, yeah, I think it goes into politics as far as that being conservative, Republican, and that kind of thought process.
Do we have any genealogical records?
Yes, we do have genealogical records. Now, the Mormons do keep those records. They're very famous for having those records. And I know that your dad has some records from his family, because his Aunt Kathy was very interested in going back through the history and finding out where she came from.
Anything else?
Not really, unless you have any questions that you wanted to ask me.
No, that's good.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.